Well, good afternoon, everybody. Wonderful that you could be here. My name is Stuart Croft. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of this wonderful university and have the pleasure of hosting the event today. Welcome to all of our friends from across the region, our friends from across the water, and of course the CBI in particular. And a special welcome to Carolyn, who's been a great friend of this university and been very supportive in doing in terms of our own economic placemaking role. We have an incredibly important topic that we're going to hear from today, and the plan is that Carolyn's going to speak for about 25 or so minutes, and then we'll have 20 or so minutes for Q&A afterwards. And what I will do in the Q&A is I will ask 2 or 3 questions, gather a few thoughts together so that we can try to get through as many of the thoughts and contributions as we possibly can. So with no further ado, please may I introduce CBI Director-General Carolyn Fairbairn.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And Stuart, a huge thank you to you. It's great to be back at the University of Warwick. You've been a great friend of business and are a highly valued member of us at the CBI. Now, there are a few of us here from the CBI today. I'd like to introduce a couple in particular. One is Ray Newton-Smith, who is our chief economist, who is going to answer all the hard questions later on. But also, it's a great pleasure to introduce our new regional chairman for the West Midlands, Jonathan Duck, who's going to stand up, who is the CEO of a wonderful local company, Antico, making flooring, a great friend of the CBI, and I know that you will get to know him over the next couple of years. So today, actually, my starting point is a very big 3 cheers for the UK economy, and it's particularly great to be here in the West Midlands, which I know is doing so incredibly well at the moment, 3 times the productivity growth of the national average. So many great companies. And there is a lot to feel very positive about. We know we're seeing very strong, sustained growth around the world, in the US, China, India and Europe, and it's a great boost for British firms. We're doing so well in many of the great industries of the future, from tech and creative industries to life science and advanced manufacturing, and of course the university sector, must never forget, it's an industry in its own right. And indeed, in so many of the fields that the West Midlands here, you are so well known for. What we produce is in demand the world over. And yet, while UK businesses are optimistic, and I hear it all around the country, they are also apprehensive. Now, let's be absolutely clear. Firms are not looking for a referendum rerun, but they do need a good Brexit deal, and speed really matters. 2 years of uncertainty is taking its toll. So we forecast the world's economy to grow at 3.7% this year. UK growth will be around 1.5%. We've slipped from second top in the G7 league table in 2015 to second bottom in 2018. So the UK economy is doing well, but it could and it should be growing faster still. And we believe that without the handbrake of Brexit uncertainty, it would be. And that is the opportunity for 2018. We very warmly welcomed the agreement in December, the decision taken by the EU Council that we can move on to talk about a transition period and to talk about trade. But January, a cold January, has also brought a cold dose of reality. Transition talks don't begin until next month. Trade talks only in late spring or even the summer. And negotiators seem a world apart from agreement. The EU is adamant that the only options on the table are existing models that don't serve either side. The UK team can't agree with itself, let alone with the EU. We've got more red lines than the Tate Modern, more positions than a yoga manual. There's too much ideology and too little urgency. But it doesn't have to be like this. It's not too late to take a different approach, one that secures mutual prosperity while respecting the result of the referendum. And this afternoon, I will set out what we believe, what business believes, needs to happen to achieve a good Brexit. It's informed by our members, firms large and small from all parts of the UK and from all sectors. Now, business does not have the answers to everything, but there's one thing we do know well. It's negotiation, about reaching deals that work for both sides. And our themes today to achieve this are clarity, flexibility, and urgency. So let me start with clarity, probably the most important thing of all. It's about being clear on what we want, clear on the consequences if we get it wrong, and on the opportunities if we get it right. Now, the current debate isn't delivering clarity. It's producing disunity fueled by ideology. And we're not very interested in ideology. We're interested in evidence and facts and analysis. Impact assessment of hard choices is what business is looking for. And in this spirit, we would really like to see the labels leave and remain consigned to history, so that 2018 can be about pulling together to get a good Brexit. Now, we're not naive. We understand the need to set strong opening positions, to present stark choices, to draw red lines. But negotiation should aim at agreement, because what matters is not the opening position, but the closing position. And if we do look at the evidence, it's clear that the options on the table don't work for anyone, not for the UK, not for the EU, and certainly not for our prosperity. So let me look at the options. And I'll start with no deal. The no deal option, still an option advocated by some. Now, the CBI has been very clear about the damage this would cause, but it does bear repeating. No deal, and by that we mean trade on WTO terms, would increase the cost on UK goods sold into the EU by between £4 and £6 billion a year. The tariffs paid by UK consumers and businesses on imported goods could be more than double this, between £11 and £13 billion. And the cost of non-tariff barriers, including extra checks and form filling, would be significantly more. We'd face confusion over everything from contracts to chemicals regulation, uncertainty for 4 million citizens, blocks to our biggest services, financial, aviation, broadcasting, disruption at ports and airports. Today, up to 10,000 trucks will pass through the port of Dover. And the port has said that even a 2-minute delay would mean 17-mile tailbacks on the motorway. And this isn't just a UK problem. Those trucks will be queuing at Calais, Antwerp, and Rotterdam as well. A Belgian study found that a no-deal Brexit could destroy over 500,000 jobs in the UK and 1.2 million jobs in the European Union. So, the evidence is absolutely clear. The UK and the EU need a deal. And then the question, of course, becomes, what kind of deal? At the heart of this question lies a truly difficult, hard choice. It's the choice between control on the one hand and access on the other. For the UK, it's control of immigration, trade policy, and rules at home, versus access to smooth trade with European markets on the other. And the EU as well has heavy red lines, including on the 4 freedoms and including on freedom of movement. And it is proposing that the UK faces a binary choice between Norway's deal with the EU or a Canada-style free trade agreement. And the trouble is that neither of these options is the right answer for business or the right answer for the UK. Take the Canada option. Yes, a Canadian model does deliver a high level of control over immigration, regulation, trade policy. And yes, a Canada-style deal works well for Canada. But I want to be really clear on this. It would be a bad Brexit outcome for the UK and for the EU. Because the Canadian deal was built on a single premise of taking 2 economies that are currently wide apart in geography, standards and trade and bringing them closer together. For instance, Canada's less than 10% of its trade with the EU. We do half of our trade with the EU, 49% to be exact, 43% of our exports and 54% of our imports. And what for Canada represents a lowering of trade barriers would for the UK represent a raising of trade barriers. And when the EU is our largest trading partner, we can't afford that, and neither can the EU. Let me give you a few more of the facts. Trade with the EU matters to thousands of UK firms. 3 in 4 firms who export do so to the European Union, and over 95% of those firms are SMEs. These are the businesses who can least afford red tape and barriers. At the moment, they need only complete a simple form, but with a Canada-style free trade agreement, firms exporting to the EU would face customs declaration, a 12-page form for each consignment of goods they send to customers. Every consignment would also need a VAT registration and certificates of origin declaring how much of each product has been made where. So the Canada deal rules of origins are as long as The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and a lot less fun to read, I can tell you. And then there's the requirement for exporters to register for an economic operator registration and identification number. Exciting stuff. The same rules would be imposed on firms across the Channel: EU car makers, wine producers, tomato growers, goods exporters of all kinds. Services too would be hit by a Canada-style deal. Broadcasting and financial services are not included. Our creative industries and legal services would be hit hard, and it would cut both ways. 8,000 European financial services firms would find their cross-channel business disrupted or blocked. I could go on. I could talk about the 2 sets of product tests that would be imposed on manufacturers here and in the EU. I could talk about the 3 months it takes for European-made drugs to be cleared for sale in Canada, or what would happen if mutual standards diverged over time, perhaps requiring different production lines on factory floors. But I think the point is clear. A Canada deal is an ocean away from what we need, and the numbers bear this out. Studies generally suggest that a Canada deal would lower our GDP by somewhere between 2% and 5%. Now, it's only by focusing on evidence in this way that we achieve clarity on what's at stake. Thousands of jobs, complications for our firms on both sides of the Channel. We'd have control, yes, but at great costs in terms of access. So what about the other option on the table, the Norway model? It would give the UK great market access, and Norway's businesses say it's worthwhile. And Norway's politicians can influence EU rules. A Norwegian-style solution could work for businesses here. But for the UK, the Norwegian model's lower level of control is a political problem. There's the obligation to permit the 4 freedoms, including freedom of movement, not to mention the substantial contribution Norway pays to EU countries. And there are some business problems too, such as the delay in the transposition of EU regulations. So, for instance, when Norway hesitated over EU chemical rules, investment in the sector briefly came to a halt. And a delay applying rules on salmon sourcing, it meant trucks containing fish were stopped at the border. These are problems. And so net-net, a Norway deal would provide valuable access, but we can and we need to do better than this. So, standing back, if this was a hard-headed business negotiation, and I know many of you in the room have done those, these facts would prompt both sides to think again. It would be time for revising those opening positions and revisiting those red lines. And that, I suggest, is exactly what needs to happen here. That both sides should re-examine each red line through the lens of evidence and the test of prosperity. And that brings me to our second theme, flexibility. Because with flexibility, a solution can and must be found. A solution that is neither Canadian nor Norwegian, but one that's focused on prosperity. It would reflect the size of our economy, its value as a marketplace next door to Europe, and crucially, it would build on 40 years of economic integration. And on both sides of the Channel, new kinds of solutions are beginning to be sketched out. They share a vital point of principle. Let's start with the rules we already share and move on from there. Now, at the CBI, we think this is really welcome thinking. It starts with what we have, yet it also recognises that if future divergence makes sense, both sides could have the choice to do so. And for many sectors of our economy, this approach could make all the difference. UK firms are certainly not clamouring for deregulation. It is not what they talk to us most about. Our aerospace and automotive and chemical sectors, for instance, have highly integrated European supply chains. Each business in that supply chain benefits from consistent regulation, and most want to maintain it. We know future divergence might come at the expense of smooth access to EU markets, but if that is right for jobs, living standards and prosperity, then that's a choice that can be made. Now, this creative approach, we believe, deserves serious thought. The EU has already set useful precedents. Turkey, Ukraine, Switzerland, even Norway, these were all new solutions once. And of course, we would need new ways to manage divergence, disagreement, and exert influence. But perhaps through a new independent court, joint committees to discuss rule changes, or UK involvement in some EU agencies. And our report last month set out how that might work. Now, a flexible solution of this kind could preserve many of the benefits of barrier-free access to the single market, while respecting the referendum call for more control. A pragmatic alternative to single market membership that might just meet the needs of business and politicians on both sides of the Channel, while safeguarding the prosperity of our nations. Now, I'd like to make a final proposal before I stop today from business about what should happen next, and that is about the UK's customs arrangement with the EU. Now, the idea behind the customs union is very simple. A single set of tariffs for goods imported from outside the EU, enabling tariff-free trade within it. Crucially, it brings no obligations over freedom of movement or payment. It does remove some of the heaviest trade barriers. Yet, it did not appear as an option in the government's customs paper. Here, again, we ask, what does the evidence say? What is best for jobs, wages, and living standards, particularly with regard to Northern Ireland? Now, Northern Ireland is the only part of the UK that shares a border with the EU, and the island's economy is deeply integrated. Some have suggested the Irish border be kept seamless by establishing a customs border in the Irish Sea, but that just moves the problem, and we would argue it actually makes it worse, because exports from Northern Ireland to Great Britain are four times greater than to the Republic of Ireland. Now, solving this very serious problem has been deferred, but it can't be deferred forever. Now, we recognise this isn't easy, and of course it's worth looking at the alternatives. But until we can find an alternative that really works, or a convincing evidence base is made to the contrary, a customs union should serve as a practical, real-world answer to this problem. Now, there may come a day when the opportunity to fully set independent trade policies outweighs the value of a customs union with the EU, outweighs the value of frictionless trade within the EU. But that day has not yet arrived. Let me just give you one fact. Take the Trans-Pacific Partnership proposal, the idea of a major partnership with the Pacific Asian countries. It's worth considering. It is worth considering, but the 11 countries of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, account for only 7% of our trade. Germany alone accounts for 11%, and the EU in total, as I said earlier, 49%. And there is a lot of scope to build global trade within current deals. Germany exports 4.7 times more to China than the UK does from within the European Union. So we are recommending that the UK puts creating a customs union with the EU back on the table, subject, of course, to negotiating a good deal. And to be crystal clear, a customs union is only one part of a compelling solution to the Northern Ireland challenge and of the border and the EU-UK long-term relationship. On its own, it is not enough. It is vital that alongside it, we have resolution to the challenge of single market access. But it is an important step along the way, good for peace as well as for prosperity. Now, on to my final point. These proposals will require flexibility and creativity from both negotiating teams, and we do believe they're achievable. But the problem is that time is running out. By March next year, our country will be out of the European Union. 40 years of economic and regulatory integration will end, and decisions must be taken fast. Otherwise, firms will have no choice but to trigger their Plan Bs, and jobs and investment will leave our shores, and future generations will pay that price. So, it is a real concern that discussions on transition won't start till next month. Full trade negotiations not until late spring or summer. We need to end this game of who blinks first. Instead, we need to find a new spirit of urgency, and that's my final theme this afternoon. And on that, I want to be very, very specific. It means a job-first transition deal between the EU and the UK in writing within 70 days. Meanwhile, our government must agree a single united strategy for what kind of Brexit the UK wants by April. Then trade talks must begin immediately that month, so we're ready for heads of terms to be signed by October. Then time is up. If that sounds hard, avoiding tough choices now will make things far harder later. So these are the needs that business has for a good Brexit. It's a call for clarity, for flexibility, and for urgency, informed by evidence rather than ideology, and by discussions with businesses across the country. Businesses who are focused on the future, ready to work with government as these trade-offs are weighed up and hard choices made. It's asking for an honest reappraisal of red lines, both here and crucially in the European Union, and a new spirit of urgency, so that 2017's year of division can become 2018's year of decision. Thank you very much indeed.